Okay, guys, so this episode is going to be a little different. I started watching a podcast, right? And it was of a young man named Nathan Reynolds. I believe he was on a podcast called The Confessionals. And I was 4 minutes in. First of all, I got this video sent to me from a friend, right? And this friend does a lot of different studies and a lot of different watchings on Nephilim. So on this podcast, the guest was somebody whose family is said to be descendants of the Nephilim. Okay, so when I first got it, I was like, "Oh, I'll watch it." But 4 minutes in, when he said that they were Luciferians, but then he went and named Lucifer's real name, which is Hallel. His Hebrew name is Hallel. Lucifer is what we call him in English. But when he said, "Yeah, the Luciferians they worship Hallel," I said, "Oh shoot, I gotta watch it on here live with y'all." Okay, I gotta watch it on here live with y'all. We're gonna watch it together. This is my first time seeing it. This is also your first time seeing it. So let's just check it out.
You come from a family that people describe it as Illuminati family. Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a lot of people are borrowing into. Now, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh, till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity, so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like, my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists.
Yeah.
Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to. You know.
Interesting. All right. So I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. Are what they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is.
Yeah.
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily. My blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff, and I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, you know? And that was brutal, because then there's this, I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing, where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature and I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, and it helped me to see that maybe I wasn't anathema, that maybe just because I have the seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not living our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, and that's what he offers to everyone. Wow. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families.
That's wild.
You hear this, man? This is somebody who believes he is a descendant of a Nephilim, yet he's saying Yeshua redeemed him. My Lord.
I didn't. Last year in the Christmas season, I took the last 2 weeks of the year off, and I had other people host the show. And my friend Joel did an episode that he called Good Nephilim. And he kind of goes into this idea of Nephilim being able to be redeemed.
Yeah.
And it's a concept that I feel like has not been tapped into a whole lot. And he did on my show for I think the first time. And since then he's kind of uncovered more information to back up his claims. But having, a real life Nephilim here, not just kidding. But it's just, it kind of goes into that concept, Yeah. And so that's why I asked you, because I was like, hold on, like that's pretty wild. Like, to be like, have I ever encountered somebody who comes from that bloodline? Maybe. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but how many times do you come across somebody that does come from that bloodline and acknowledges it, knows it? That's another thing. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of hit on the childhood stuff right there in that kind of description. Was it something that came from complete childhood, where it's like from your earliest memories it's just been kind of manipulated and jacked up? And what was that like for you growing up?
Well, my family set up a base of operations. They're from the East Coast, the Reynolds family on one side. My mother's family, just for clarity, I've never exposed a lot of the side of things that were going on with, let me say it another way. The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. Like my great-grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia. And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account, because it's who can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family, is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and they would make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. and they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. That was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland. And they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modification purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was, died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
Wow. How long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody that they want you to do. And this happens by taking you away from your mom and your dad constantly and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts, right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who were abusing children, and they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance, and then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children. And I would slice their throats up, man. I would tear them to freaking ribbons. And I loved it because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your face is smashed. And like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, like fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. We would move around constantly. My parents would move us around sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. And now my sisters on the other side, they weren't roped into this thing. I was in a male cult. This is the Brotherhood of the Snake down in Lake Havasu. But this is, my sisters weren't caught up in the same thing, but they were caught up by the family as a whole. And so this carried on, and we moved into this place called Show Low Pinetop, Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation was 100 yards from my door. And they would go out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved. That was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out, but I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Other things come out of people's mouths. Other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, but it was hard to not resist. You're in it.
Well, so, all right, seeing things like that, like you say, all right, so you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally
not be the people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the Watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing. It's because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a Watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaschizmadzotoi in the Greek in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. There's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic. And all of a sudden, it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock, physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I've physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body. And this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You've got billionaires today who admit it on Joe Rogan podcasts and other places, where they're like, yeah, I used the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand. This is a religion. you know, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself. And so these watchers will give people this power. Their priest class will dispense that to people who want to go into, you know, like what I come from down there in the Apache reservation was the people that slip between realms and become animals, you know, and it's
You are hitting things that are confirming so many things that like I speak hypothetically about, almost in the sense that like I believe but I can't prove kind of thing.
mhm.
Um, but like for instance, years ago I had a guy on the show, and he didn't say it on the show, so I usually don't say his name because some people know who I'm talking about, some people don't. But because he didn't say it on the show, I don't know why he didn't say it on the show. But he said that he was a former, I guess I forget, like Satanist or whatever. Like he came from a deep line of this stuff, and he said at one point he says at one point people have to make a decision whether they're going to go the vampire route or the werewolf route.
Mhm.
And he said that he was told by somebody who went the werewolf route that he should go vampire because doing werewolf is like the most painful thing you'll ever experience in your entire life.
By the way, guys, for those who don't know, when he's saying the Watchers, he's talking about fallen angels. Okay.
I don't know. I can't say factually how true that is or not, but you're saying a lot of similar things, and now you're saying that there's traversing realms involved with this. So so you're saying, are you saying that there are people who are traversing realms because of their ability to change into these things, or are those two separate categories, or sometimes the same?
I would say it like this: the reason that there's these First Nation people have preserved these priest class, right? Just all across the world. This isn't just like localized to white European people. There are people here who practice this type of same old religion, and they call them skinwalkers. That's a name for them, right? But these witches and warlocks that practice these things, you know, they go and rob graves and they take the infants' bones out and they grind them into powders, you know, and they use that as poisons, you know, like that. So the Jesuits was this like massive assassination team training group that was operating there that started training me. Well, then it was like you needed to learn this spiritual side of assassination and hunting and stalking. And that's where the skinwalkers and the Navajo and the Dene are like they have a different priest class that does that. And so that's what I got put out there for, because they do stuff like slipping between realms. We call them shadow walkers in the industry. Like these are guys that have this means to go between spaces. And so where you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't detect them. They're not on thermal, but there's certain types of ways that you can detect them. So it's like you have to get kind of raised up into these arts. And these are like, this is why we call it like, this is to me the realm of Azazel. I'm just convinced that this is all Azazel's kingdom in that realm, on that side of it. And people are just branching off of his tree of knowledge of good and evil side.
Notice he said Azazel, or some people may call him Azazel. It's a fallen angel. If you ever read the book of Enoch, it talks about Azazel a lot. This is crazy.
You know, and he's ultimately the one that was teaching men these ways of war in that sense of it. But like, just like with what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, man, they cursed him with lycanthropy. Daniel warns him, hey, don't go down that road. You got a dream from the Most High, don't do it. And he did it anyway. He said the Watchers are going to curse you. And that's literally what they did, man. They cursed him and made him a beast. They took him down the lycanthropy road, because that's what they do, man. His hair grew out, his nails grew out. Like he became a different thing that if you and I spotted it on camera, we would say it's a cryptid. We would call these things cryptids because we don't have a proper working knowledge of history and understanding why people called these things these names. But the vampire side of the equation, they tend to be much more human masquerading, whereas you get much more feral production when people start to take this other route of becoming a beast. That's kind of the options that they give people in that world. But I believe a lot of the guys that you see out there, or who are experiencing these things, they're loose assets for families. Like these are guard dogs on estates. Like that's literally, there was a training program I had to go to when I was 9 years old, and we'd go up to this farm in Michigan that was in the family, my dad's cousin, and they train all of these police, military, law enforcement, and VIP protection dogs, you know, but then they have other cages that are man-sized cages for other stuff, because that gets brought in by the families, you know. And it's like some of these are people that are just beasts. like physically people that are like not like the rest of us, strength wise, speed wise, power wise, intelligence wise. And then others of them are just unrecognizable as anything related to man. And so
Is that their ability, the strength, intelligence? Is that something that is brought on through uh, ritual, or is it brought on through like medical injections? You know, like I've heard stories of military injecting people with things, and they essentially become a super soldier. Is it that kind of stuff, or a combination, or what?
I think it's just both. It depends on who's got high tech and who's got the old tech. And the old tech is generally superior. The new tech has side effects. When people are getting injections and are using, recombinant DNA to start augmenting stuff, there's other variables that are unpredictable. Whereas if you just use a different spirit, you can predict what it's going to be. That's like when a skinwalker kills, that's what you have to go through, man. I'm 9 years old and I had to stink and kill somebody with my hands, a friend, a person that I love, because my family was not somebody I loved. And so part of in order to be inhabited by these spirits that will shapeshift you and allow you to become a different creature, you're going to kill somebody that you love, and you're going to kill them with your bare hands. And you're going to breathe in their life as they die. And it's when you do that this stuff comes on you, and that's the stuff that makes you convinced you can never be redeemed.
I believe it. So all right, there's so much to unpack. I'm trying to collect my thoughts. Let's just go with the assassin route. You were a kid being trained to do that. When you were doing it, did you have to transform? Is that part of the process for you, or did you ever have to never go down that route?
I wasn't like, I didn't go that route. My route was being able to get by anything. Like, you got to be able to invade anything and be able to familiarize yourself and be understanding of how to navigate and get past people's weaknesses or things' weaknesses. Like, you want to train how to do infiltration and exfiltration with targets, hardened targets. You're going to have to learn how to get by guard dogs, physical guard dogs, wolf kind, and then you're going to have to learn how to get by stuff that's like, they have a warlock that sits in this estate and they do ritual magic to do all these spells and incantations. You need to know how to get through that. So there's like, you get training by getting exposed to all these different variables so that you can be able to pierce through no matter what it is and eliminate somebody or plant something. It wasn't always just like assassination. That was an aspect of it, but a lot of it is counter-espionage and espionage. You're setting people up, right? Or you're trying to extract something. Like, there's this project we'll have to get into more. It's called the Jason Project, which is a secret scientific military group that's now more publicly known. It's a consulting group for the smartest people in the entire world, but they had children. And so they started this junior Jason program where they're like, yeah, we should all breed together, and have these really super high intelligent children. Well, then they could be great spies. And so that's where you get into espionage as a major tacit of this. That is, they get interlocked so heavily, and you start to figure out that the vast majority of the people behind the scenes are not just connected to these religious orders, they're connected to the government. And that a lot of them are State Department employees. And this is how the United States military and government regulates and controls assets out of containment. People that are not doing what they're supposed to, that have information they shouldn't have, and they need to be eliminated, or you need to extract a piece of information from them. And so that's what really launched me into that realm, was right then in those mountains of the White Mountains is what they're called. But that was when I chose more of, I don't want anything. I want to not be in this cult side. It's not like that was respected, but it was acknowledged. And I got opportunities to do the side of it that I thought was high speed and low drag and looked way more freeing, which was the modern American soldier. I wanted that route. But you're designed to basically always be a spy, and that you're going to feed back the family what you want. And if you're going to be put in a position, we'll open the doors for you. And that's where all of that really was birthed out of, was there in the White Mountains. And then once that decision was made, my great-grandfather was brought back to our house in Colorado. He was located there, and my father signed me over to him. He got parental rights. He got bedtime rights with me at night.
That's sick.
For a few years, until he was too sick to do anything about it. And my dad got access to the trust fund. And that was when everything went from like surface level, poor, middle class American to like planes, new cars, plane, new car, houses, bed and breakfasts. Like my family became wealthy. And I got thrown from freak show level werewolf Psychoville down in Arizona into the big city of Colorado Springs, which was military gods. You know, like military, it is the capital of the New World Order. It's Denver, the Front Range of Colorado is 100% the place where the capital has been built and the infrastructure was laid. And so I got put into the military side of the projects there when I was a young teen. And that's where NORAD Space Command and all of this underground facility from the United States Air Force Academy. And that's where I went into the military side of the equation. And that's where I stayed for quite a few years.
That's wild. I had a guy on the show a while ago. I don't want to rehash the story. I don't even remember what episode it was called or what I called it. I think it was a member show, but he was messing with something in his apartment, and somebody called in terroristic threats on him, and he had like all this like powder and stuff. Like he wasn't making bomb. I don't think he was making bombs, but like, anyways, the SWAT team came and raided his home or his apartment, and his brother called me. He's like, dude, why is a SWAT team at your apartment right now? And he's at work. And so he just panicked and he fled. And,
oh gosh.
And he this is in Colorado. He fled into the woods. And this is where the story for the show came up, because he's out in the woods and all of a sudden he's being hunted by translucent people shooting at him. And he said this lasted the entire night until he wound up getting to like a safe zone where it just kind of stopped. And he wound up turning himself in and cleared his name and everything. And I don't know, like I don't think he spent any time in jail, because he wasn't building bombs, but he panicked. Like he's the kind of guy, like if I remember correctly, he's a bug out guy kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And so
it's happening. It's going down.
It's going down.
We're heading to the hills.
We out, you know, like I've been training for this,
right.
you know,
He's heading to the tunnel.
yeah, exactly. And so, but that he said that was, if not on the NORAD property, it was right near it.
Cheyenne Mountain.
Yeah. And so we theorized that he might have even just stumbled into a training exercise.
That's what you could call it.
Yeah.
It's a fun word.
So in other words, it was training, you know, like, oh, here's an easy target,
Yeah.
you know? So what you're saying is it's almost like you're confirming that there is a lot of high level stuff happening there that would be almost sci-fi to ordinary people.
That's where Nikola Tesla set up his entire laboratory system.
Is that
Same
right?
place. Oh yeah.
Wow.
This is a high place. So like you got to understand there's cardinal points across the earth, and you are well aware of this, but there's cardinal points where the veil is thin. It's like a real thing. It's not like some kind of like, it's a reality. It's like a physical, scientifically documentable event that takes place in some of these places. And that's why he chose that spot. That's why people, if you start to go to this place called Garden of the Gods, it's this gigantic sandstone feature that just sticks up at the base of 14,110 foot Pikes Peak, this massive mountain. That's where Colorado Springs sits. And then it's a confluence of all these springs, these incredible hot, well, mostly cool water, but mineral-rich springs called Manitou Springs. That's where I ended up going to high school. And it's the highest concentrations of witches in the United States per capita occupy that area, because it's a gigantic tunnel system that has been there from before the days of old, always been there. People have been there, and they've been doing these kinds of participatory acts. Well, the United States military moved into there on a huge degree in the 1940s and began to build during the Cold War, they began to build a lot of tunnel systems. And this is where the continuity of government operations headquarters was going to be when it came to the central part of the United States. And so that Denver is ideally situated because you have the Great Plains to the east, and you have these gigantic cascades of mountains, the Rocky Mountains, as a shield behind you. And so that's why the continuity of government, if it ever relocates from the East Coast, it will go there. And that's where the base of major military operations has embedded itself. And so when somebody stumbles onto something that might be a training, like you call it, like these are just basic kit that a lot of our soldiers have that's just not on the TV yet, you know, where soldiers are needing to be stealth technology, you know, or they're rubbing thermal creams on themselves to hide from any type of thermal imaging software. This is like low end of the tech side of the equation. But Fort Carson, which is where I was stationed, that is a massive military base. And that's where, but abreast to that, there's 6 military bases surrounding Colorado Springs. So it is a gigantic ring of this, including deep underground military bases and stuff that goes up to Denver, and that's interlocked all the way up to Wyoming, where all the communications cables are for the entire country meet. So it's a really big area for all of that. And then you have all of the spiritual side of stuff that starts in the mountains, in particular in the Front Range and Rampart Range Road. So like my family ended up moving into this little town just outside of Colorado Springs, and like giant 5-pointed star, cardinal point, where everyone gathers on the high days, all the witch crap, right? All that stuff goes on in there, and that's embraced out there culturally. It's like the norm, and it's like normal that your children are part of this stuff. And so it's good to raise children in sick families in that environment. So that's what that hub caters to. Whereas Colorado Springs on the other side is focused on the family, and it's like die-hard Christian side, and it's like, yeah, but all the creepy occultist people are on that side in Manitou Springs. We keep them over there where they have their coffin races and all the rest of it,
Wow. So we're gonna do an overtime with you. We're gonna focus heavy on the military experience, but I'm assuming the answer, and it's just a yes or no. You don't need to go into detail. Have you ever been in an deep underground base?
Yes.
Of course you have. I figured you have, and it's probably not once. So, I definitely want to get into that for the overtime for sure. I want to kind of backtrack a bit to a couple things. One, you mentioned about people transforming their bodies, and that Lycan is definitely that route. We've had people on the show, lots of people who have encountered these dog man type creatures. The one that comes to mind is episode 335. Kyle was the groundbreaking episode for me going into the dog man topic. I've had it before, but this was just like, whoa. Long story short, he's 15 years old, hunting with his grandfather in Kentucky, Daniel Boone National Forest, the upper side of it. And it's middle of the night. His grandfather's in the truck because he was older, so they had radios. The dogs get on a scent. You hear him howling. He comes up on the scene, and he can hear his dogs fighting with coyotes. The coyotes go off. He only had 2 dogs out there. And in that fight, he heard his younger dog run off as well. So now the older dog, who's a really good hunter, really strong dog, is by himself, fights off these coyotes. They come back in, and it sounded like they came back in a pack almost, and started whooping up on his hound dog. I think it's a hound dog. Don't hold me to that, but hunting dog. And then he hears his other dog come back in. And when his other dog came back in, the fight changes. Coyotes are gone. He comes onto the scene. His older dog goes back to treeing the raccoon in the tree. He comes over, pats him on the head, and he hears his younger dog behind the tree chowing down on a coyote. He goes around the tree, and it's not the younger dog. The younger dog never came back. This was a very large dog on all 4. He said it was so big that it was holding a coyote by the rib cage in its mouth. And he said that when he came up on it, it looked at him, and it stood up on its hind legs, took chase. That unfolds a whole scene where basically his hunting dog saved his life. His hunting dog did survive, but barely. And he thought his dog had died at some point. That story that he shared on the show, is there any way outside of what you shared that it could be something else other than somebody that transformed from human to upright walking dog, that maybe was one of those people who weren't able to handle that and could never change back? Is that in your mind what that would be? Or do you think that there are actual creatures out there that maybe come from other realms, or maybe just like some people? I don't personally subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot's just this hairy primate that we can't catch.
Yeah.
I think there's more woo-woo stuff to it. Do you think it's along those lines? What are your thoughts on that side of stuff?
That's a great question. Man, that's brutal. Because I think on one side of it, I think we really do have an entire subspecies of creatures that do exist mostly inside the earth, and they are not readily surface dwelling anymore. And I do believe, like in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, man, inside the London Bridge is a massive room, like a throne room, where they engage in this magic. But this Brotherhood of the Serpent, they call upon Nahash, the dragon. And
would that be in normal terms Satan?
Yeah, most people know him as Satan, right? Yeah. But like there is a great red dragon. Like it's a physical, that's what he looks like in reality. He was cursed, and man, he made him a monster. Yahweh made him a monster. And they would commune with these things. There's 13 grandfathers take 13 of their grandsons, and they bring them into these rooms and do these things on these specific times and rituals for all kinds of stuff. But the dragons tell them the future. This is like always what they've been able to do, is like Satan leads Yeshua up onto a great high place and says, I shows him all the nations of the earth and all their kingdoms and their reigns in a moment of time. He shows them the future. That's what they do. They can show you what's to come. This is why we get hunted by them. He knows if we're going to be part of his adversaries. He knows if we're going to be on his enemy list. And that's why he targets us at our youth. That's what's so happened. So many people, they're like, why has my life been a nightmare from the beginning? It's because you have a purpose and a destiny that adversary absolutely categorically does not want to come to pass. It's a real life Terminator scenario. And so he sends his assets in to destroy people, to ruin their life. And those meeting places happen when they sit down in these rooms and they try to call up these creatures. It's from inside the earth. It wasn't like ethereal mist. They were physical things that would come out of these tunnels, and they would come into the room and they would consume the offerings that were given there. And then the words of the Nachash would come forth, and they would prophesy to these guys. Like, they would prophesy out of the mouth of the serpent what each one of their life callings, their shots. He's the shot caller, man. It's like a pimp from prison. He's calling the shots, and you had a bunch of fallen watchers that were in prison in Tartarus for a reason. Yeah, but they got ways of getting messages out, just like the cronies in jail today, you know. And that's what a lot of people are dealing with. They think they're dealing with the top dog, and they're like, I'm finally into the big game. And it's like you're dealing with, you know, a private in the hierarchy, but he can masquerade like a general. And so some people are really dealing with death himself, and some of them are dealing with one of his princes. And this is what my family's covenant was with the dragon. They didn't mess around, man. They went all the way to the chain of command. They uncovered a bunch of, my great-grandfather's grandfather was an archaeologist who dug into the Indian mounds out in the Ohio River Valley. And they started finding a priest class that was these serpent worshipers. And that's what they started calling upon. And they started trying to wake up and rise up Huachiblos, which is these deities, these dragon fire deities that demand.
In Ohio?
Where these mounds were found, it's the Ohio River Valley. Yeah.
We're talking about serpent mounds?
Yeah. Well, this wasn't specifically, not that I'm aware of that it was specifically a serpent mound, but it was a mound that was in an area that was now being farmed.
Okay.
And so whether or not it was specifically a serpent mound, it was not identified as that. But they ended up finding a lot of these ancient tomes. They found the writings of this priest class, and they started using their magic to call back up these fallen ones. And they were, the part of the trade is the priest class has all this secret knowledge that they then use to rule the kings with. And that's what they wanted. So that's how the Reynolds family, this is also documented in a book called The Gilded Leaf by Patrick Reynolds, who was a bloodline descendant specifically and in the actual inheritance of the Winston cigarette company, you know, the tobacco empire that ended up buying Nabisco Foods, that ended up running the world.
What relation is it to you? Like an uncle?
I don't know that I am a bloodline relative of that guy.
Oh, okay.
Patrick Reynolds specifically. My Reynolds family is the one that does the black gold stuff, all the secret, disgusting, dirty money. They're the white launderers of the money, right? But you got to have your seedy, corrupt group. And that's what my family did. They did all the dirty stuff.
Wow.
And so but in his book, in his firsthand account, they talk about the Joshua coin and them using a coin that was from Judas that he betrayed Yeshua with, and the 30 pieces of silver that was the blood guilt money. They would touch that silver coin to anything they wanted, and it would grow an empire. The cost was always massive bloodshed and a massive demand of life. And that's always what the serpent required. He wanted life. And so, like, on one side of the equation, that's what they used to build the Reynolds empire. That's what they used to go down Alcoa and all the aluminum industry and all of the stuff they spray on us and the stuff they poison us with and inject us with and all the variables of complexities of targeting that they've done against us. That all comes from that covenant that those two brothers sat down, did, and entered into a blood covenant with the dragon, man. And this is what the fruit of it was. Well, my family entered into that on a different route through this priest class thing. And that's what they would practice down there. And that's the same old religion that people have been using a long time. So on one side of it, I've seen physical beings that are definitely not like our animals up here come out of these spaces from inside the earth. I've seen in deep underground military bases, dogmen, like you would kind of describe them, some more humanized. And I think a lot of those were experimentation and genetic splicing. I think a lot of that was gene editing stuff that I've seen. But I do believe that some of these things are holdovers from the old days. They're the last of their kinds, and they've been breeding them, right? And I believe that that's the stuff that's prophesied that's going to come back out and cause the hearts of men to stop for fear of looking after these things that are coming up on the earth. You know, that's why everywhere I went throughout my youth, I could go to these tunnels and these caves and call out, and I could hear them, and they would call back, you know, and it's like it's a seductive power that draws you back into it.
You could call out to them? Like, was it like a language or a sound or what?
Oh, yeah, man. You can learn to call to them. You can go out here in these hills out here and do it. You can still do it tonight. On these full moons and stuff, you can start calling out, and you'll think you'll hear coyotes at first, and then all of a sudden it's a totally different, you know, it's a different sound that starts to resonate, and then it's a different one that calls off from over here, right? You got to understand, some of these guys that you think are just neighbors and stuff or just people, like this is what they keep in their barn, you know?
Are they
this is the stuff they keep. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I go out hunting for these things.
I understand. I understand completely, man. That being said, I got hooked back into it with Timothy Alberino and Steve Quill and a lot of these guys when I was married and my wife didn't know anything about this whole stinking world of who I was and everything else.
How'd you meet your wife if she didn't know who you were? You suckered her. You suckered her.
That's a way to put it, man.
She's still with you, so she loves you. You know,
bro. She's all in, man. She's amazing. Cool. She is my shield bearer, man. She's amazing. She has fought. We have waged a war together beyond your wildest imagination. She has seen the full force of the occult come after us and people slaughtering sacrifices to try to desecrate us, and people try to hunt us and murder us in front of her face.
She's
man,
seen it
in front of my children's face. They've sent special kill teams after us in front of my children's face, man. And I have seen the living power, man. Recent.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That being said, man, I do believe that there is a hierarchy and you can call upon the Most High, man, and he has delivered us. And I've never had to fire a shot at any of these guys. I haven't had to take out their drones. I have seen supernatural intervention. I've seen their weapons jam in front of my face, like chapter in the book called Murder on Their Minds, where I talk all about it, man. I've seen him provide supernatural miracles because you got to understand, we're dealing with the fallen. We are not dealing with the Most High. And he owns a much more powerful arsenal. And let me tell you, at his word, all these nations, kingdoms, and thrones will bow. And it's an absolute reality. It's an inevitability. And so that's why I serve him, man, because I've seen what the power of covenant is. And I had a covenant with the law of sin and death before in my life, but now I have a covenant with the Most High of peace and life. And he's given me a new purpose. He's given me a family. He's given me a mission. He's given me the opportunity to do the things I dreamed of when I was that little. Man, I used to run away in the night in Arizona, man, and I would run into the base of that mountain, man. There's these caves that are there that I just love caves. For me, it's safety in that. People call it hunting and all this. I'm like, dude, these to me were people. I'm more like a beast, man. I was ripping people's throats out with my teeth when I was a child to survive a fight. Like that does something to you when you try to see other children playing with a bat wing toy or whatever. And you're like, you're puking blood in the toilet.
Yeah.
Because of all the crap you just went through the night before, you know? And like, you are unrelatable to men anymore. You can't comprehend the things that are in your mind when you have been defiled so systemically for so long. And so I just lived with dogs. I literally would flee into the yards with people and I would crawl into the dog loos and just survive the night. But then that wasn't enough, man, because these were city dogs. Then I started looking for the feral ones, man. I started looking for the coyotes, you know, and then I started looking for the wolves and crawling into their dens because I can imitate any of them, man. I can crawl around like a dog and be like a
serious?
dog. You bet, man.
Wow.
You can get them to take you in if you know their language, if you know their gestures. You can learn all of this stuff, man. And like when you're little, when you're like a child,
wow,
they'll treat you different, you know? Yeah. And they like, man, I literally ended up living with these things. And they're like, I have this love for wolves because of that. Because I've understood what a companion can be when you're desperate and distraught. And like, these were my best friends. And that sounds so weird to people, but like when I was a child, I bonded with the animals. I wanted to murder all the people because people were monsters. I couldn't imagine a world of the living. I got so lost in the world of the dead. And I just wanted to find some semblance of innocence and purity. And I could not find it in people because everybody was manipulating me. I was nothing but an asset to them. And I didn't know which end of me they wanted. Do they want my skills? Do they want what do they want from me? And so it perverted my understanding of people. And so I just fled to animals. And that's where I talk to these creatures and live with them. Well, then you start encountering these other ones, you know, and you start to befriend them. And it just becomes like a pack. Well, then my family would rip me away from that and move, and I would have to try to find a new one. And there was this just constant destabilization. And so there's a lot of people that get caught in that world, man, and people brand them as feral children, like you might want to call it, or whatever you want to call it, man. But they're survivors. That's what they are, man. They're overcomers. They're the remnant. They're the leftovers of nightmares. And you know what? They're some of the most incredible people or things that have ever been. And that's why I'm here to preach the gospel to every creature. That's what it says. My commission from my king who gave me my marching orders is to preach the gospel to every creature. And that's what I'll do, man. I'll do it in the tunnels. I'll do it everywhere from the tops of the roofs to the bottom of the earth. But I'm much more familiar and comfortable down there than I am out here. This is the world of oddities where people think this stuff is like legend and myth and strangeness. And it's like you go into these families, they broker deals with this stuff. They get down with these things and they generationally raise their children to have that seed line in them. So it's a different world than what most people are used to. But I tell you what, these animals they carry a history of what this land used to look like and what these people used to be. And it wasn't that long ago. This is a short history when you think of the last 150 years in the United States. That's not long ago. It was a wilderness. And there used to be 150 million people who lived here, who raised animals and livestock and farmed and cultivated landscapes and brilliant, massive, beautiful cities. And yet they interacted with giants and these creatures that were oddities for time and antiquity.
You're talking about unwritten history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. You keep throwing everything out here, and I haven't even got to how you met your wife.
Oh, yeah. We got there.
So are you talking along the lines of like people talking about Tartaria today and like how they basically built over entire civilizations and some of these structures that we have in these big cities? Like, for instance, I've heard this, and I've heard both sides of it. So in Philadelphia, they say that City Hall is actually remnants of an old civilization. We didn't actually build it. Has been here. Maybe we built on top of it or something like that. But when coming from that area, I used to run Center City, especially as like a rookie driver. They send everybody down to Center City. And so you're pedaling freight down in Center City with a freaking truck. And I can't describe to people how massive City Hall is in Philly. It's one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen in my life. And I've been in it. It is absolutely massive. You will get lost if you don't know where you're going. And I forget how long, but the idea of decades sticks out in my head. Like I was told that it took an extremely long time to build that building. And that always sat weird to me. I was like, how does it take that long to build a building? Like, this isn't like something that was built, I say thousands of years ago, where they were, making the brick by brick, make the brick, then put the brick there kind of thing or whatever, And so that I go off on that spiel because that's something that always sticks out in my head when I talk about Tartaria and things like that. But is that kind of like the angle that you're talking about? Like this idea that there was, you said 150,000 or million people that lived here and they traded with giants and the cities and civilizations. What happened to those things?
Well, I wasn't really hitting on the Tartaria and the architecture side of it. And there's other examples like the City Hall in Iowa and other places. I traveled, like I told you before, 4.5 years in an RV. And at the time, mud flood in Tartaria was in. And I was like, what? I'm going to go look. So I just started traveling around to these places specifically to try to find and identify and document evidence of this catastrophic event, or are these recovered cities, as opposed to the idea that we, all built these with horse and buggy and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I wanted to know for myself, but that isn't specifically the history line that I was talking about. I'm talking about before that, the side of it that is definitely more like when you go in, like one of the best books, for those of you that are book guys, The Discovery and Conquest of Mexico by Hernan del Castillo is the firsthand account of the conquistadors coming into the Americas and their strategies and tactics for infiltrating and enthroning a new deity known as Mary, right? The Queen of Heaven. They wanted to invoke her over this territory. And there was a massive battle between the priest class during that time. And you get to see these hierarchy of these ones that were worshiping in Mexico City predominantly, that was running a massive human trafficking campaign and all the sacrifices and slaughters that are happening for that. I mean, it's nationwide at that point. And we're talking millions of people that are being fed, physically fed through butcheries to the priests. Like that's the way they did it. And that priest class fled north into the Americas when they got persecuted. And they came into the Americas, the Northern America, and they brought a lot of that ideology with them. And they began to use that, weaponize that power, and start to take over the people that were up here. And they began to eradicate them and butcher them and force them into compliance with this. And then the land responded with this desecration, and all these invaders began to come in. But this is stuff that they had prophesied was going to happen. And so a lot of them, they literally did not fight. They literally had prophecies that there was going to come bearded men with shiny metal helmets, and they're going to come and you're supposed to bow down and yield to them. And so that's what they did. That's why you had a few hundred guys with a few horses and dogs, unbelievable hunting dogs, crazy stories in there, full armor, killing squads of people, these dogs single-handedly. It's
From Europe?
Yeah, bro. You want to talk about what dogs can do? We have no idea
Really?
what dogs do. Oh, yeah. DeSoto and what he brought with his dogs in the Americas, most terrifying things that the natives had ever encountered was the dogs, because they would kill hundreds of people, like just jump from one to the next, ripping throats out. Like these are all documented things. So I love that side of the history of understanding where did this all come in here, and why was there the expunging of the record of anybody who had a culture or a written language. Well, that's because we wanted to support this ideology of manifest destiny for this invasion force that was coming from Europe, was that it is our right to rule over these savages and to begin to take their territory. But ahead of that was the surveyors, and then following them was this military expedition across the West, which was to the Army Corps of Civil Engineering, eradicate the history of the people out there. And that's what they did. That's why they built dams and rivers and lakes in specific places and changed geography. They're sponging any evidence that this is a advanced civilization. But we have firsthand accounts of people that said, we've been in the biggest cities of Europe, and over here, they're better and more beautiful and more grand and well-designed than anything we've ever encountered.
Wow.
This is not just one. Many, 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 many people that came over here in the beginning could not understand the capacity of the people that were here. This is the origin place of the earth in many more ways than what people think of as Africa. This place is where the first documented evidence of a horse, of a camel, of all of these languages, mummies, the oldest mummies in the world, all this stuff is here.
Here.
It's just not public.
Wow.
It's publicly accessible. It's just not popular.
You know what's interesting is that you say that, and fast forward a few hundred years, here we are. And now we look at European cities and we're like, man, they're so beautifully built. Look how clean they are, because our cities suck. Like everything's falling apart. Nothing's built to last more than 50 years. Like it's just, it kind of totally flip-flopped. That's wild. So, all right, I'm going to go back again. And I do want to hit on the story of how your relationship with your wife evolved and stuff, because, and we will hit everybody listening right now. First of all, we will ask the question of where are your parents today? How do you what's the story there? Because I even told you that's the question I was going to ask you at some point. But I'm looking at mine. I also, while I'm talking here, before we go any further, I didn't say it in the beginning. I will put it in the link in the description. You do have a book. You did mention it. And I was like, dang it, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but it's called Snatched from the Flames, One Man's Journey to Uncover the Family Secrets Buried in His Blood-Stained Past. And that is available on Amazon, and I will put the link in the description of this episode. But let's talk about family.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the family that you love now.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you meet your wife? How did that whole thing evolve? Did you ever think that you'd have to tell her this stuff? Did you have plans? If not, what spawned you telling her? How did she take it?
Yeah.
All that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very interested on the social side of this. Like,
She, when I got out of the military, I ended up studying psychology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I wanted to put people back together. I was tired of taking them apart, and I wanted to understand what the heck was going on in my mind, because when the military washed me out, man, they scrubbed my memory. They did multiple traumatic brain injuries and all kinds of specific things to try to expunge what had happened there. They don't want you telling your secrets. Anyways, I was a dribbling mess. I literally couldn't remember how to walk right, eat right. I had Post-it notes on my wall to tell me to shower and put on clothes and names. I went from savant level IQ kind of stuff to like impossibly debilitated, and it was excruciating on me. And so I just went on this path of trying to just restore my mind and get my mind to function again. And it was in the course of that I ended up going to this church out in Colorado